Good afternoon, everyone. It's so great to have you here today. My name is Whitney. I am a fifth year in the PhD clinical psychology program at Texas A&M, and I'll be serving as the moderator. Just give me one second. I'm just going to pull up um, my little spiel. So, aYo Binitie is an artist and creative technologist who splits his time between Nigeria and England. A former art lecturer, he has worked as a developer and media consultant on several high-profile corporate projects for companies. His paintings are in several public and private collections. There is no beginning, no end, just void, thought, and form. This statement comes closest to the way I describe myself in my work. From the void, I have the thoughts of what I would like to create, document, or record. Bits and pieces of the experiences of my journey through life. From these fragments, I find the form to visualize those experiences in the best way I can. The form is colored and shaped by the spiritual energy from the void at that space and time. I say this because I try very hard to paint from the soul rather than simply illustrating. Painting this way can be challenging as you have no idea of the direction, just the goal. But sometimes from the inevitable, accidents come with new and exciting directions. African mythology, dance, gestures, and motifs feature a lot in my work. I find it necessary sometimes, a sort of self exorcism to visualize and paint strong emotional subjective states of my mind. The goal is to make my being and vision more beautiful, meaningful, and spiritual every day. That journey continues. So without further ado, I'll mute myself and aYo, please, the floor is yours.
Hi, everybody. It's really nice to be here. And this evening, or actually, it's evening in London. This afternoon, we will look at art as a therapy for health. First of all, let's get through with the legalese. So I have no actual or potential conflict of interest in relation to light. I've got to do that. And let's start. So as Whitney has said, my name is aYo Binitie. I'm an artist, creative technologist. I used to lecture in fine arts at the University of Benin in Nigeria many moons ago. Now, today we're going to be talking about art as a therapy for health. I guess the first question we need to ask is, what exactly is art therapy? It's a form of psychotherapy that uses art as its primary mode of expression and communication. It's not a diagnostic tool, but it allows the patient or the person who needs healing to address emotional issues which may be confusing or distressing. Art therapy is rooted in the idea that creative expression can foster healing and improve their mental well-being. Now, in looking at art therapy, we need to break it into the two main subjects, art and health. Now, how do they exactly play? How do they correlate? For some strange reason, humanity has always chased art and health. They've been two pursuits that we've always been interested in from the beginning of recorded history, and probably before, but of course we can only go as far as what we have found. The earliest documented piece of art is about 73,000 years old, and it's a line drawing done on a piece of rock discovered at the Blombos Caves in South Africa. They have almost they look like hashtags actually when you actually look at the lines. This is actually our first, this was the first documented piece of art that we know so far. Now, from that point on, or probably before that, each culture has created their own artistic form, depending on their circumstance or their need to actually create um, their vision. We've had cave paintings, and we've moved from cave paintings all the way to contemporary installations and all that. As a species, the need to create and create art forms seems to be endemic to us, whether it's body art or their paintings or even utilitarian objects always seem to have a creative spirit to them. Health, on the other hand, is tied to our existence as a species, without question. The healthier you are, the greater your chances of survival. And that was the same in the Neanderthal days, it's the same today. Back in the more brutal past of humanity, if you were not very healthy, you stood the chance of being lunch for some wild animal. In our contemporary world, viruses will pick off those who are not as healthy, the less healthy in our society. So you see that health has always been something we have always chased. We have needed to improve upon. We've needed to find ways and means of getting better. Now, because of this, we've always tried to find cures, ways to improve our health, improve performance of our bodies. So people are trying to get stronger, smarter. And where there are infirmities, we're trying to find cures that actually improve or cure all sorts of ill health. And this has given rise to all sorts of practices, cures, snake oil sellers, all kinds of different ways of trying to solve this problem of ill health or improving our health. In 1946, the World Health Organization defined holistic health as complete state of being, where your physical, social, and mental well-being were all right, rather than it just being the absence of disease or infirmity. And strangely enough, it also declared that ill health is brought about by an imbalance of man in his total ecological system. And so the whole idea is that you are healthy when the mental, the physical, and the social are in sync. And when there is an imbalance in any of these factors, you are unhealthy. It's not just either an injury or an illness from a virus or mental illness, whatever it is. You need to have a balance across board in order to be holistically healthy. And this idea, this concept of holistic health is not a new one at all. A lot of ancient cultures have been in tune with this concept. Mens sana and corpore sano is a sound mind and a sound body is an ancient Roman motto, and it really was the gold standard for holistic health in the Roman Empire. They strived to get both mind, physical, and spiritual in sync, and that was what they believed was a completely healthy man. In the Asian world, in Japan, and actually through a lot of the Asian world, the whole idea of mens sana in corpore sano also existed. Sound mind, sound body. For the Japanese Bushido, the way of the warrior, this concept was central. And in, for example, the Eizu clan used to send their young samurai to the Nishikan, which was a school for martial training, but it was more of a whole school to groom the warrior. So you were taught etiquette, you were taught classical music, you were taught mathematics, astronomy, and you were taught calligraphy. Calligraphy is actually quite interesting because from then till now, a lot of people who have studied especially the Japanese and Chinese martial arts, believe that calligraphy helps to focus the mind. So while you're doing your martial art training, the physical, the impact of calligraphy allows you to hone your mind and bring it to a focus. And in honing your spirit then affects your physical. And so you become a more rounded martial artist by the practice of calligraphy or painting. So when we look at this whole idea of, if we go back to the WHO preamble, talking about the fact that you must have a sound mind, sound body, sound environment, and not just the absence of illness, we can see that from what we've looked at so far, the external influence of the arts, whether it's calligraphy or, as we've discussed previously, actually affects and focuses the mind, calms it, and that in effect has a ripple effect on the physical. So when you interact or participate in art, it enhances your moods, it soothes and focuses your emotions. And as a result, there is an impact on your physical state of being. Now, this is what we just discussed. This is what I just said, where, the whole idea of a sound mind creates a ripple effect. And so we look at the fact that participating in art can actually improve the individual, arguably for the better. This idea also of art or art intervention to improve body and mind is actually not a new one at all. And the first documented organization to actually do this were the Bimaristans. Now, Bimaristan comes from a Persian word, which means a sick people's place. So it really is the precursors of the modern hospital. The first one was established as a mobile hospital at the Battle of Kandak in AD 627. And then from that point on, they spread across the whole Islamic world, Damascus, Cairo, and all that. What I found interesting in my research was that even at that point, they catered for both the physically and mentally infirm. And more interestingly was that for both, music, and that's the first time it's actually been documented that music was used as a health therapy. Music was used as a health therapy for both the physical and the mentally infirm. And when we draw back from the time of the Bimaristans to present time, people have been there have been so many studies trying to find out if actually art impacts health. I mean, it had seemed to, but we needed empirical data to prove that it did. So a number of studies have been done. And I like this one, which happened at the Chelsea and Westminster Hospital, where they compared the use and non-use of art intervention in different units of the hospital. So one was a placebo where nothing was happening, and then they had art intervention in some other units. Now, what they discovered there was that those units where there was art intervention, the patients had much improved clinical outcomes. The patients showed better vital signs. They were less stressed. They needed less medication to sleep. And in effect, they had reduced hospital stays. Now, for the purpose of this workshop, we're really looking at the visual arts. Now, the visual arts are slightly different because based on imagery, it provides a way for us to express ourselves in ways that are extremely difficult to express ourselves in ways that would be otherwise difficult. You have a feeling, it's difficult to write about how you feel, but a line or a blur or something on paper may give a better indication about how exactly you feel at that point in time. It also provides a refuge from the intense emotions that emanate from illness. I can attest to that. It fills an occupational void and gives you a sense of accomplishment. But more the point is that it has a low entry bar. You don't have to have formal training. So it's a non-judgmental space where you can express yourself freely without bothering about what the outcome is. So I thought it was a good idea to look at a number of artists who are well known, but suffered from illness, and visual arts became their refuge. Chuck Close is probably one of the best known, definitely a modern master of painting. He died in 2021. He's known for his huge portraits, photorealistic portraits, so he hated that word. But Chuck Close was ill. From the time he was young, he had a whole smorgasbord of illnesses: dyslexia, neuromuscular disease, and finally, at 45, at the height of his fame, he became paralyzed. Now, if you think about the fact that from 45 to when he died at 81, most of his best known work was created. He had to paint from a wheelchair with his hands in a metal brace, and the canvases would be gridded, and they would turn the canvases so that he had access to individual spots on the canvas. Considering the fact that this man painted pictures which were 10, 15 feet by 20 feet from a wheelchair, working from a grid, it just makes it completely mind-boggling how he did that. But art was what gave him the drive. Art was what gave him a sense of purpose. Art was what saved him from just vegetating and dying in a wheelchair. The next artist I thought we should look at is Richard Dadd. Richard Dadd's one of my favorite painters. I studied him a lot while I was in art school, and he started off being one of the bright young things, as they say, of the Victorian age, and then on a journey he contacted mental illness, and he lived most of his life in the Bethlehem and Broadmoor mental hospitals. Strangely enough, his doctors encouraged him to paint while he was in care, because they realized that his most lucid and calm periods was while he was at work. Sadly, he killed his father because he felt that he was the son of ISIS, and therefore his father was an impersonator. And it's only now, having looked at all the evidence, that it's assumed that he may have been a paranoid schizophrenic. But he saw fairies, and so his work is absolutely mind-boggling. the detail, the beauty. And this was just art. It was his therapy. It was his lifeline. It gave him a way out of a debilitating mental illness that, goodness knows what he would have done without it. Now, this one, which is called The Darkness, is personal. This is my work. And for the last few years, I've had a number of health problems myself. This is why this talk is so personal to me, because art has actually been my therapy in a really dark place. Um, at the point at which my health problems started, I had left the arts and I spent a lot more time developing. And in this period when I virtually lost the use of my limbs and life seemed like it was not worth living, coming back to paint was what gave me a sense of self-discovery. It allowed me to dredge up feelings in my subconscious that probably led to my clinical depression. And as I started to skill up, I felt a sense of worth. I could see my work growing. And therefore, I started to feel, something, aYo, you can actually make a go of this. This is a talent you've had, and therefore it's probably a good thing that you've got back into this. But the most important bit of it was the ability to fight anxiety and depression, because as you got into the work, you found less time for those feelings. You were elated by what you were creating. Yes, there was the strife because I know what was expected. And at that point, I'd left it for so long that I wasn't as skilled as I felt I should be. But because I could see it growing and because I was so involved in it, um, it prevented me from harming myself. This particular piece, which is called The Darkness, was done on one of those days when I felt that really life wasn't worth it. And it was the only way I could actually visually show how dark I felt life had become. Now, one of the ways we're talking about art as a therapy, but for most ill people, the thing is, how do you get somebody to even get to start drawing or painting or doing anything? It's difficult because people are in a difficult place. A particular technique which I used in art schools called automatic writing, and it was developed by the surrealists. Andre Masson was one of those who actually adapted automatic writing to automatic painting, though we all call it automatic writing. And the whole idea was to leave the conscious alone, paint with the unconscious. So you had a piece of paper and you let yourself drift. You let your hands be controlled by your mind. You did not try to create a form. You just tried to express yourself. I guess looking at it, Jackson Pollock's paintings would be some sort of automatic painting, if you look at it from that point of view. And so you allowed yourself to drift and create marks, meditate on the marks, allow the marks to become something. And then, because the unconscious is chaotic, you sometimes needed the conscious to shape it. So you would go from creating marks straight from your mind to then looking at those marks and trying to pull out an image from it. This painting by Max Ernst is is a painting that was that particular technique of painting was used to create. It's also a very good way when you have nothing in your mind to find new ways to make marks. And sometimes out of the accident, you come across a new way to express yourself. So let's look at automatic writing as an art therapy methodology. And you can see how it actually works and how the unconscious starts and then the conscious takes over to actually create something tangible and interesting. So I started this particular piece with the entry bar is low. Charcoal is always a good way to start because charcoal, while it's difficult, it's easy to rub out. You can clean it. If you started with paint, it becomes difficult to to use negative marks. If you have charcoal, you can play around with it, shape it, rub it out, do as many things as you wish. And the idea here was just start from nothing. All I wanted to see were the swirls, those strange marks that a bag of charcoal dust does. And then I start to put in the lines, just enjoying the lines for what they are themselves. Lines can be so intriguing because they are the heart and soul of any piece of art. Whether you make them thin or slim or you make them bold, you just lines can be so beautiful. So it's something that I've always enjoyed doing. And in working on this, I had no idea what I was going to come up with. I just enjoyed working the lines, feeling the texture on the paper, just playing with shapes and trying to see what else would come through. Also another interesting part of it was always trying to let the conscious go. So you think you're working and you begin to become too conscious of stuff. I would rub stuff off because I felt, okay, now you're letting your training and the need to find the shape control the work. So I would rub it out and start again. And so you keep rubbing. But the interesting thing, and this is why I like charcoal so much, is creating negative marks or taking out the dark also creates interesting shapes in itself. So ideally, when you're working on this, you have a piece of charcoal, have a rubber as well. It's just nice. You put a dark mark on, you rub it out. Sometimes in that break, you see something that's actually quite interesting. You can use a credit card to smudge it. Just the idea is not to think about creating anything per se, but to let your mind wander. And as your mind wanders, you try and feel what you're creating. It's I would call it, without being too whatever about it, I would call it almost a meditation in drawing. So you just express yourself. It doesn't matter. And this is the whole thing about it not being judgmental. It's your space. Just put the lines. Sometimes it will work. Sometimes it won't work. It really does not matter at all whether it works or not. What is important is that you're expressing yourself. And this is what I tried to do with this. It's quite interesting because while I use it sometimes, this is the first time in a long time that I actually decided to go full automatic painting and just see how exactly it would work. It's a great way to get to create art because since you're not trying to achieve anything, all you're trying to do is feel, and it doesn't really matter. You're not trying to create anything anyway. You're just trying to express yourself, your feelings. So it's okay. Just go ahead and mark up the paper. Sometimes you will mark up 5, 6, 7 bits of paper, but when it's all said and done, you would feel so much the better for it. And the interesting thing about this is art is also about patience. So sometimes you make all these marks on paper. They don't mean anything to you. You just see the chaos. And then you put it aside and come back 3 hours later, and all of a sudden you can see eyes, you can see form, you can see men, women, you can see your whole landscape within that chaos. And then you can start to build something that's tangible, that can be recognized from all that. So that's what this whole process was about. We're pushing, pulling, scratching, scraping, not looking for anything in particular, but somehow with the conscious, you also, because it's absolutely impossible. I'm not even sure it's possible when you're asleep to switch off the unconscious, to switch off the conscious. So I guess the conscious itself in some manner is also trying to find form within all of this. So as I work through it and just adding charcoal, taking charcoal out, finding new forms, and trying to pull out and see if there's anything interesting that I have missed. And then all of a sudden, I start to see form within it. And I start to work on that particular form. Pulling, pushing, scraping. Some of the things I would remove, some I would add a little more dusting with charcoal, and so on. And then you just keep pushing it. There is no beginning, there's no end to it. It's just you and the sheet of paper. So having pulled and pushed and done all these things, what we finally ended up with was this. So scratching, scraping, pulling, erasing, adding, removing, and then allowing the conscious to help to pull out imagery from all the mess that I had made. We arrived finally at this figure. And this is the beauty of automatism. You cannot tell what you will create, but as you push and pull and scrape and scratch and erase and do all that stuff, just making marks, all of a sudden you get to a point where you start to see stuff. And then from that point, you can create, a really interesting image. So that is the way that art can be therapeutic with regards to health. Thank you.
Wow, I'm just in awe. Thank you so much. For me, as I was watching your presentation, just seeing how you talked about the history of it and the different individuals who played an instrumental role in sort of bridging the connection between art and therapy, and then talking about your own journey, and just even showing us the process that you went through with the charcoal, and then seeing that final product. Like my mind is just blown. Like I'm just so in awe of just your skill and your expertise. It's just amazing. Thank you so much for your
Thanks
presentation.
a lot.
It's just I'm in awe. Before I have a few questions that I have, but I wanted to open it up to anyone in our group today. If anyone had any questions that you had for him, feel free to unmute yourself. Okay, I will get started with questions then. So my first
Okay.
question for you is, what is one word to describe art, to describe your art, and why does it matter for healing?
Life is primarily the way I would describe it. And it's because it saved me. That's really that's the nuts and bolts of it. Like I said before, about 4 years ago, I had a really strange experience. I'd gone to train at night, came back home, and I was fine. And 2 days later, I couldn't walk. And it took a year of rehabilitation to be able to walk 20 meters without crutches. In that period, my business, my startup went to crap. Just don't want, life doesn't seem to mean anything. But fortunately, you know, I looked at it as an opportunity, almost a sabbatical that I hadn't had to reskill up and start to paint. So I spent the best part of 2 years just drawing and painting, and all of a sudden it started to seem like, okay, this is where you really want to go now. So the interesting thing about being ill is the sort of darkness it can put you to. I mean, it's one thing to be ill with malaria or fever, which next week you're going to be fine. It's another thing to be ill when you start to think, I might be in a wheelchair all my life or whatever. It's different. So it actually saved me. There's really no other way to put it.
Wow, thank you. Such a personal connection to just your art and the
Yeah.
practice. Absolutely. My second question is, so take us back to the beginning. Why did you choose art over any other medium?
That's an interesting question. I don't think I chose it. I think it chose me. Really. I mean, you can only do what you can do. I think that's the thing. So I didn't choose it. It seemed the way I could express myself. So that was the way. I mean, people would pick what they're more inclined to do. So some people would probably sing. Some people would write. For me, it was making marks.
I was hoping you would say that, but chose you and you didn't choose it.
Well,
Awesome.
that's really the truth. It did choose me. I didn't choose it.
That's amazing. Excellent. And so how do you start your process of creating artwork? You shared with us like a glimpse of it in that video. Like, how do you start the process?
It's actually, strangely enough, it's quite similar to that. I've found that in creating art, you have an idea, okay, which you can visualize, but it's almost like, when you're writing a business proposal or something, it seems like it's all there. And then once you start to write, then all of a sudden it doesn't look like it's all there anymore. It just doesn't quite work as you visualize it. So you start with an idea. That's the thought from the void that I always put it, and then you start, and you just continue to work it, push it, pull it, modify. It's very similar to what I just showed. And usually what happens, and that's the great thing about it, is the difference between being an artist and being an illustrator. Because with an artist, 9 times out of 10, it's the journey. You cannot tell what the end is going to be. With an illustrator, they've graded it out. You're just painting, you fill it up, and that's it. And that's the thing. But that journey is very gratifying because on the way, you find so many things and you grow because it's an experience. And you usually end up with something that can be satisfying. Sometimes it doesn't work. Can be satisfying because you didn't anticipate the end. Sometimes it's really terrible when you can see the end because you get to the end and okay, so it's the end. But when you don't know what the result would be and you find something that's really interesting, then it does make sense. It becomes really fun.
Thank you. And where do you find inspiration when you are beginning this process?
A lot of times, most of I'm generally inspired by stories and experiences. Um, I, there's so much information in African mythology and deities and stuff like that, and you've read or heard about. So, but most of this stuff has not been seen. It's not being visualized. So I feel that there's a whole body of work that I can be tapped into. But then the other part is that I also find a lot of mileage in trying to visualize emotions. So how do you feel when you're contemplating or you're happy or your spirit is free and stuff like those seem to be the two places where my um where I pull my data from to work with. It's yes, that's it. So it's either subjective or a lot of it is mythological or cultural.
Excellent. Thank you. Um, and who did you lean on or learn from throughout this process of creating art?
Well, there were a number of people, to be honest. My father was the first because he loved art and used to paint. So um, he saw and encouraged me to paint. Um, and then I had a whole series of really good instructors. Guy called Osiaudu, who works out in New York now. Is and with Osiaudu is actually quite interesting because he's a complete abstractionist. While my work is very figurative, but somehow or the other, he was able to allow me to grow in my own direction without influencing me with his own way of looking at things. Um, there was my late professor, Clary Nelson Cole, a brilliant painter, um, who was actually the first person that made me think I could have a go at being a painter for as a profession. His work is just spellbinding. So yeah, I had quite a few people who supported and pushed me in that direction, and I was just naturally curious. And I guess, like I said, I've always painted, drawn. The thing is, I suppose when you have a gift, you don't pay much attention to it. So I sort of like, yeah, I could do it, and never really paid much attention to it till I started seeing people who were executing to a really high level, and then I decided, okay, fine, you need to get and try and see if you can hit that sort of level.
Thank you. And what is your favorite part of using art as a therapeutic practice and why?
It calms your spirit. That's one, and that's really important. It just calms your spirit and it gives you a sense of focus because you're trying to create something. And the best part is that you get lost in the journey. So you just, once you're in the art, you're, to use the parlance, you're in the zone, and you just stay in there until you get out. So it doesn't leave you room to stare at your belly button and try and find out what's wrong with your life and all that stuff. You stay focused until you create stuff. And like I said before, it's an adventure in itself because you're constantly finding out new things about yourself and about how you develop and about how your mind works and how you solve spatial problems.
Excellent. And I have one more question for you. So, as someone who might not have any prior knowledge of artwork or experience creating art, what pieces of advice would you give to other people interested in using their art as a way to engage both the mind and the body?
Well, you just need to start. It's interesting because people always say, "Oh, you can't draw. I can't paint. I can't draw. I can't." It's not true. Everybody can. You may not be Picasso, but you can draw. And drawing, I always used to say this to my students, drawing is a technique that anyone can learn. Being an artist is a different thing that God gives. That's different because it's a unique way of seeing, and you can't replicate that. People just see things in their own way. But drawing is actually technical, and you can master it if you just take the patience to learn. Ultimately, a drawing is a series of lines and shapes. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. If you put all the shapes together correctly, it will form something. It's actually as simple as that. The problem usually is that people put one line down and expect to see a whole picture. No, you have to take the time and the patience to put all those, interlock all those shapes in the right shades, and all of a sudden, picture.
I'll keep that in mind. Time and patience. Excellent. And so, as we kind of go into we have a few minutes left. What closing remarks do you have for our guest here today?
Well, we've been talking about art as therapy, and when it's all said and done, looking looking through history, you can see that a certain amount of whatever you do, it's important to engage both your spirit and your body. Um, while my way is the visual art, for some other people, it may be writing, it may be music, it may be sculpture, but you need to find your art, your creative spirit, because building that will have a direct consequence on your physical and mental well-being, and it can only lead to a better person, a better you, and a better understanding of yourself. I mean, we're in, at this point in the world, it's a very stressful world, and we all need our own points of refuge where we can try and make some sense out of the whole the whole thing. So find your art, visual, audible, whatever, and indulge in it. You don't have to become the next Picasso. It's really for yourself, for your personal growth. Indulge in art. It's good for you.
Good for the soul. How grateful I am, and I'll speak for everyone else here, for just walking us through your process. I'm going to go back to what you shared when you were using the charcoal, and I was like, I saw it, and I was like, I wonder where this is going to go. And then when you showed the final product, like my mind was just in awe of just how you did what you did, and just so skilled. And so I'm very grateful for what you shared with us today. Thank you so much.